Okay, we're just going to look at a couple of other things that can affect reproductive performance in herds. One thing that you may not notice when you go to a new herd is the structure of the herd. That is, how many older cows are in the herd, how many subfertile cows are present at the time when mating commences. In dairy herds, if there are insufficient replacement heifers and inadequate culling of aged cows, then this can slowly increase the number of subfertile cows in a herd. Cows that don't get pregnant in the first year, but the dairy farmers keep milking them through to the second year, these are called carryover cows. And these can often have reduced reproductive performance because some of these cows will have chronic fertility issues. In other literature you might read about repeat breeder cows, and these are cows that take a number of services before they get pregnant or they don't get pregnant. Now, if the number of these cows proportionally increases in a herd, then the overall reproductive performance of the herd will decline. The problem with carryover cows is sometimes they'll get too fat as well, and this will have a negative impact on their fertility as well. In a beef herd situation, older cows that are perhaps older than 10 years old, may have reduced fertility. And if not pregnant at the end of the mating period, these animals should likely to be culled. And in the northern herds, they might be spayed, fattened, and then sold. So it's just, I guess the issue here is having enough replacement animals so that these older, less fertile animals can be replaced by younger, fertile animals that are going to calve at the right time of the year. Just talk a little bit about bull management. When bulls that are being used in herds, we want those bulls to be of optimum fertility. In order to try to assure that they're a low risk of being infertile or subfertile, they should have a breeding soundness examination done. They should be vaccinated for diseases such as vibriosis, tested negative for bovine virus, diarrhea virus. That is, they shouldn't be persistently infected with this virus. Preferably they shouldn't be used on other farms, in which case they could pick up a venereal disease from another farm and then bring it back to another farm and transmit that disease. You don't want them to be overfed, and they should be looked after. Often bulls tend to be just turfed out into the bull paddock when they're not being used, ignored, and then the following year when they're needed they're just brought in and put in with the cows. But they need to be looked after so that they're fit and well and are able to do the job. When we're talking about using bulls with heifers, we should preferably use young bulls, virgin bulls that are less likely to carry venereal diseases. They're not as heavy as the older bulls, and they're less likely to injure heifers. In a dairy herd situation where cows are walking to the dairy twice a day, if the bull is with the herd, then farm owners often will rotate those bulls on a regular basis, as bulls can often get a little bit tired walking, use extra energy for walking, and it can be harder on their feet because they're heavier animals. So usually they'll be rotated approximately every 2 weeks or as required. How many bulls should we run with a herd? In general, somewhere between 2.5% to 4% of the herd should be bulls per 100 cows. When we're talking about heifers, similar numbers for heifers, but main rule of thumb is about 1 bull to 30 heifers. Some bulls can cope with more heifers than that, but just as a rule of thumb, that should be adequate. Particularly with heifers, if you have one full bull that breaks down, then you've at least got another backup bull that's working, and it won't be a disaster. If in beef herd situations, if the bulls are tested with a breeding soundness examination, then you can usually get by with 2.5% at a bull rate of 2.5%. Where they're not BSE tested, then you might go at the higher rate of 4%, just in case there are some bulls in that group that are subfertile. If you happen to synchronise estrus, so you've got a lot of cows coming in heat at the same time, it's preferable not to rely on bulls because they often cannot get around and service every cow that's in heat. But if it's absolutely necessary, then you actually need a lot of bulls, and that's about 1 bull to every 10 to 15 females in order to cope, and even that might not be enough in some situations. So generally that's not a very practical option. If we're synchronising estrus, we're usually going to be artificially inseminating. Now in a dairy herd, if you know that there's a certain percentage of cows that are already likely to be pregnant, then you can reduce the number of bulls that you may place with the herd. So if we've got no cows pregnant, we're in this 2.5 to 4% range. If half the herd is pregnant, we may drop that down to 2 to 3%. If there's more than 70% of the cows pregnant when the bulls are out, you may get away with 1 to 1.5% of bulls because they've just got less work to do. So you can adjust the number of bulls depending on the number of cows that you think are pregnant in the herd. Insemination practices, this can affect reproductive performance. We talked about this when we discussed the AI lecture, but just as a brief review, if a herd is suffering from low conception rates as associated with artificial insemination, then you'd want to review the insemination practices that are taking place. How are they thawing the semen? What temperature of the water is the semen being thawed at? How long are they waiting between loading the gun or preparing the semen and inseminating cows? What's their hygiene like? I can remember one inseminator watching him one day, and he would wipe the vulva of the cow with the tip of the AI gun, and of course that would contaminate the tip of the AI gun. If you think that the insemination practices are okay, then maybe you need to check the semen or have that tested. Check the equipment that they're using. Maybe the thermometer they're using to thaw the semen is actually inaccurate. Maybe it's the water temperature is too high. If they're synchronizing estrus, you have to ensure that they've stuck to the protocol that you've advised them to use, that their injection technique is adequate. If they're using a vaccinator gun, that vaccinator gun is actually administering the appropriate dose or the expected dose. I've seen some situations where the vaccinator gun is not working properly, and farmers have contacted me that they're having problems with their synchronization programs, and when I've gone to the dairy and checked their gun, it's not delivering the appropriate dose, and so they're underdosing. Similarly, if you've got people working that are injecting hormones, you've got to ensure that they are constantly checking that they're delivering the dose that they're supposed to inject. And then also you may want to, one way of checking about insemination practices, if you have any concerns about the inseminators, is to compare pregnancy rates between inseminators. This will require uniformity of cows that they inseminate, so you're not comparing apples with oranges, and they should have inseminated at least more than 50 cows to have a valid comparison. So here's some review questions to just consider for this section. What ratio of bulls per 100 cows would you recommend for a dairy farmer who is mating 100 Holstein Friesian heifers to Jersey bulls? Well, in this situation we're looking at 2.5 to 4% of the herd should be bulls. If they're not BSE tested, we might go to the 3 to 4% level. So as a rough rule of thumb, we'd talk about 3 to 4 bulls per 100 cows for this situation. What management practices for bulls can be used to help ensure that fertility is not compromised through deficiencies in bulls? Well, in this case, we can ensure that the bulls are BSE tested, they're free from venereal diseases, preferably they're virgin bulls when they're brought onto the farm and they haven't been used on another property. We can rotate those bulls if it's a dairy herd situation approximately every 2 weeks to try and ensure that fresh bulls are available for the herd. We can ensure that the bulls that we're mixing together are socially compatible, so that the bulls don't spend time fighting. So make sure the bulls are socialised. And be vigilant. Some bulls do break down, and you need to be aware of that. For example, if a bull does go lame or gets a penile hematoma or something like that, that bull is replaced as soon as possible. And ensure prior to the breeding season that the bulls are looked after. They have adequate body condition, but they're not over fat. Deworm them, if they get sick, that they're treated promptly. So a number of things can be done to ensure that bulls are looked after so that they're working at their peak performance.